Captain Sarah Mitchell gripped the controls of her A-10 Thunderbolt A-2 as the morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains. The radio crackled with urgent voices from the forward operating base, each transmission more desperate than the last. She had been in the air for 45 minutes, circling above what intelligence reports called a routine patrol sector. Nothing about this morning felt routine anymore. The mission had started like countless others. Sarah had awakened at 500 hours, gone through her pre-flight checklist, and kissed the small photo of her daughter Emma that she kept tucked inside her helmet bag. Emma was 8 years old and lived with Sarah's mother back in Ohio. Every time Sarah climbed into the cockpit, she thought about getting home to read bedtime stories and help with homework again. But now, as static filled her headset, Sarah realized this would not be an ordinary day. The voice of Captain Rodriguez from the Tactical Operations Center cut through the interference with words that made her blood run cold. Hawkeye 6, we have a situation developing. Alpha Company walked into an ambush 15 minutes ago. 270 soldiers are pinned down in a valley about 12 clicks from your position. Enemy forces have surrounded them completely. Sarah banked her aircraft toward the coordinates Rodriguez provided. Through the morning haze, she could see smoke rising from what looked like several burning vehicles. Her A-10's sensors began picking up heat signatures scattered across the rocky terrain below. The distinctive shape of American military vehicles became visible, along with the unmistakable signs of a firefight in progress. Rodriguez, this is Hawkeye 6. I have eyes on the target area. Looks like they're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. What's the enemy strength estimate? Hawkeye 6. Intel suggests at least 400 insurgents with heavy weapons. They've got our people completely surrounded in a kill zone. The troops have been trying to break out for the past 20 minutes, but they're taking casualties every time they move. Sarah studied the terrain through her targeting system. The valley was shaped like a natural amphitheater, with rocky ridges on 3 sides providing perfect cover for enemy fighters. The American forces were trapped in the low ground with minimal cover, essentially sitting ducks for anyone with high ground advantage. Vehicle wreckage provided some protection, but not nearly enough for 270 people. The radio erupted with frantic voices as ground commanders tried to coordinate a response. Sarah could hear the strain in their voices, the barely controlled panic of professionals watching their people get torn apart by enemy fire. Machine guns chattered in the background of every transmission, punctuated by the distinctive whistle and boom of incoming mortar rounds. All units, this is Colonel Mason. We need immediate close air support at grid reference 74 Alpha November. Our people are getting chewed up down there. Hawkeye 6. How soon can you provide fire support? Sarah was already running calculations in her head. Her A-10 carried enough ammunition to make a significant difference, but the positioning would be tricky. The enemy fighters had chosen their ambush site well, placing the Americans in a position where any air support would have to thread the needle between friendly forces and hostile positions, sometimes separated by less than 50 meters. Colonel Mason, this is Hawkeye 6. I'm in position and ready to provide support, but I need precise coordinates on friendly positions. The target area is extremely tight, and I'm seeing friendlies mixed in with hostiles across the entire valley floor. Hawkeye 6, stand by for coordinates from ground observers. While waiting for targeting information, Sarah circled the area and tried to piece together what had happened. From the air, she could see that Alpha Company had been moving through the valley in a standard convoy formation when the attack began. The lead vehicles had been hit by improvised explosive devices, blocking the narrow road and trapping the entire column. Enemy fighters had then opened fire from concealed positions on the surrounding ridges. The situation was textbook asymmetric warfare. The insurgents had chosen the time, place, and method of engagement to maximize their advantages while minimizing American strengths. They knew that air support would eventually arrive, so they had positioned themselves to make close air support as difficult and dangerous as possible. Sarah's targeting computer began receiving data streams from ground-based laser designators. Slowly, A tactical picture emerged on her display screens. Red dots marked confirmed enemy positions, while blue markers showed the locations of American forces. What she saw made her stomach tighten with concern. The enemy had established interlocking fields of fire from at least 6 different positions. Machine gun nests covered every possible escape route from the valley, while mortar teams provided indirect fire support from positions further back in the ridges. Sniper teams had been placed to target anyone who tried to move between cover positions. It was a sophisticated and well-planned operation. Hawkeye 6, this is Groundhog Actual. We've got wounded who need immediate evacuation, but we can't move them under this fire. Every time we try to reach the casualty collection point, we lose more people. Can you hit the machine gun nest at coordinates 74 Alpha November 01? Sarah studied the coordinates on her display. The machine gun position was clearly visible, dug into a rocky outcropping about 60 meters from the nearest American position. Under normal circumstances, it would be an easy target for her 30mm cannon. But nothing about this situation was normal. Groundhog Actual, I can see the target, but I'm also seeing multiple friendly signatures within 75 meters of that position. That's well within the danger close radius for 30mm fire. I need all friendly units to mark their positions and confirm minimum safe distances before I can engage. The response came back immediately, filled with the sound of gunfire and shouting. Hawkeye 6, we don't have time for standard procedures. That machine gun is tearing us apart. We're losing people every minute you wait. Sarah felt the weight of command decision settling on her shoulders. Every pilot trained for moments like this. But no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the reality of having 270 lives depending on split-second decisions. She could hear the desperation in the ground commander's voice, could almost feel the terror of soldiers trapped under heavy fire with nowhere to run. But she also knew the statistics on friendly fire incidents. A single misdirected burst from her cannon could kill a dozen American soldiers instantly. The 30mm rounds her A-10 fired were designed to destroy armored vehicles and would tear through human targets with devastating effect. Even a small error in targeting could turn her from a lifesaver into an executioner. Groundhog Actual, I understand your situation, but I need positive identification of all friendly positions before I can provide fire support this close to your people. Can you get smoke markers on friendly positions? Negative, Hawkeye 6. We're too pinned down to move. The enemy has us covered from multiple angles. Every time someone tries to throw smoke, they get cut down before they can mark the position. Sarah realized she was facing the kind of impossible decision that would define her career and possibly her conscience for the rest of her life. By the book, she should abort the close air support mission until proper safety protocols could be established. The risk of friendly fire was simply too high to justify immediate action. But she could also see through her targeting system that the Americans on the ground were being systematically destroyed. Vehicle after vehicle was taking hits from rocket-propelled grenades. Wounded soldiers were crying out for help, while their comrades tried desperately to provide covering fire with dwindling ammunition supplies. The radio crackled with a new voice, this one younger and more frightened than the others. Any aircraft in the area, this is Sergeant Williams with 3rd Platoon. We've got wounded everywhere and we're almost out of ammo. They're closing in on our position from the North Ridge. If someone doesn't help us soon, we're not going to make it out of here. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about Emma and about the 270 soldiers trapped below her. She thought about the oath she had taken when she received her commission, the promise to support and defend against all enemies. She thought about the training that had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. Groundhog Actual, this is Hawkeye 6. I'm going to make a gun run on the Northern Ridge position. Tell your people to stay low and mark their positions with anything reflective they have. I'm coming in from the south at minimal altitude. Roger, Hawkeye 6. We'll do our best to mark positions, but most of our signaling equipment was in the vehicles that got hit first. Sarah pushed her throttles forward and began her descent toward the valley. The A-10 Thunderbolt II had been designed specifically for this type of close air support mission, built to survive heavy ground fire while delivering precise firepower in support of troops in contact. But even the best aircraft was only as good as the pilot flying it, and right now 270 American soldiers were counting on her to thread an impossible needle. As she lined up for her first attack run, Sarah could see muzzle flashes winking like deadly stars from positions all around the valley. Tracer rounds reached up toward her aircraft like reaching fingers, each one carrying enough explosive power to bring down her plane if it found its mark. The enemy fighters had spotted her approach and were now directing anti-aircraft fire in her direction. Sarah armed her 30mm cannon and selected her first target, a machine gun nest that appeared to be directing the heaviest fire toward the trapped Americans. Through her heads-up display, she could see the targeting reticle settle over the enemy position. Her finger moved to the trigger, ready to unleash the devastating firepower that could tip the balance of this battle. But even as she prepared to fire, Sarah knew that this was only the beginning of what would become the most challenging mission of her military career. Sarah's finger squeezed the trigger, and the distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon filled the cockpit like rolling thunder. 30mm rounds streamed toward the machine gun nest at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, each projectile capable of punching through armored vehicles. The rocky outcropping where the enemy position had been located erupted in clouds of dust and debris. "Good hit, Hawkeye 6. That machine gun is silent. But we've got another problem. They're setting up mortars on the eastern ridge, and our wounded are exposed in the open ground near the road." Sarah banked hard to the right, pulling her aircraft around for another pass while scanning for the new threat. Through her targeting system, she could see teams of insurgents moving equipment into position along the ridgeline. The mortar teams had chosen their location well, setting up behind a rocky spine that would protect them from direct fire while giving them clear lines of sight to the trapped American forces. As she positioned for her next attack run, Sarah's radio exploded with urgent transmissions. Multiple ground units were calling for immediate support, each one describing increasingly desperate situations. The enemy forces had clearly planned this ambush carefully, with backup positions and contingency plans already in place. "Hawkeye 6, this is Major Peterson. We're taking heavy casualties trying to reach our wounded. That mortar team is dropping rounds right into our casualty collection point. Can you take them out?" Sarah studied the target through her optics. The mortar position was approximately 40 meters from the nearest group of American soldiers, close enough that any missed rounds could cause significant friendly fire casualties. But she could also see through her infrared sensors that wounded Americans were lying exposed in the open, unable to move to cover under the intense enemy fire. "Major Peterson, I can see the target, but it's extremely close to friendly positions. I need you to move your people back at least 100 meters before I can engage with cannon fire." "Negative, Hawkeye 6. We can't move the wounded that far under this fire, and the enemy is adjusting their mortar fire to walk rounds closer to our position. If you don't hit them in the next 60 seconds, they're going to drop rounds right on top of our casualties." Sarah realized she was facing the same impossible choice she had encountered with the first target, but now the stakes were even higher. She could see wounded soldiers lying motionless near the road, dependent on their comrades to protect them while they waited for medical evacuation. Every minute that passed increased the likelihood that mortar rounds would find their mark among the most vulnerable members of the unit. She made a decision that went against every safety protocol in the air support manual. Instead of using her 30mm cannon from altitude, Sarah decided to make an extremely low-level pass with unguided rockets. The 2.75-inch rockets carried smaller warheads than her cannon rounds, but they could still be effective against personnel targets if placed accurately. "Major Peterson, I'm coming in with rockets on the eastern ridge position. Tell your people to get down and stay down until I pass overhead." Sarah pushed her aircraft into a steep dive, dropping to less than 200 feet above the valley floor. At this altitude, she was well within range of small arms fire and portable anti-aircraft missiles. But the low approach would give her the precision she needed to hit the mortar team without endangering the wounded Americans. Enemy fighters along the ridges opened fire as soon as they spotted her approach. Tracer rounds zipped past her canopy, while rifle bullets sparked off her aircraft's armored hull. The A-10 had been built to absorb this type of punishment, but Sarah knew that a lucky shot in the right place could still bring her down. She lined up the rocket sight on the mortar position and fired a pair of white phosphorus marking rockets. The projectiles streaked toward the ridge and detonated in brilliant white explosions, sending burning fragments cascading across the enemy position. The mortar teams scattered as their ammunition cache erupted in a series of secondary explosions. Outstanding shot, Hawkeye 6. The mortars are down. But we've got a new problem developing on the western slope. Looks like they're bringing up rocket-propelled grenades to finish off our vehicles. Sarah pulled out of her attack dive and climbed back to a safer altitude while scanning the western ridge for new targets. Her aircraft had taken several hits during the low-level pass, and warning lights were beginning to illuminate on her instrument panel. Nothing appeared to be critically damaged yet, but she knew that continued low-level operations would eventually result in more serious battle damage. Through her targeting system, she could see teams of insurgents moving into position with shoulder-fired weapons. The RPG teams were focusing their attention on the remaining American vehicles, which provided the only significant cover for the trapped soldiers. If the vehicles were destroyed, the Americans would be completely exposed in the open ground of the valley floor. Hawkeye 6, this is Colonel Mason. We're trying to organize a breakout attempt, but we need those RPG teams neutralized before we can move. How much ammunition do you have remaining? Sarah checked her weapons status display. She had fired approximately 30% of her 30mm ammunition and used 4 of her rockets during the previous engagements. Her fuel state was still adequate for extended operations, but she was beginning to worry about ammunition conservation if the battle continued much longer. Colonel Mason, I've got about 700 rounds of 30mm and 6 rockets remaining. I can continue to provide support, but we need to make every shot count. Roger, Hawkeye 6. We're going to attempt a coordinated breakout in 15 minutes. We need you to suppress those RPG positions and create a corridor for our vehicles to move toward the southern exit from the valley. Sarah understood what Colonel Mason was asking her to do. The breakout attempt would require her to provide continuous fire support while the American forces moved across open ground under enemy observation. She would need to suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously while avoiding friendly fire incidents during a complex ground movement. As she positioned for another series of attack runs, Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission that made her heart skip a beat. The voice belonged to Captain Rodriguez from the Tactical Operations Center, and his tone carried an urgency she had never heard before. Hawkeye 6, this is Rodriguez. We've got intelligence indicating that enemy reinforcements are moving toward your position. At least 200 additional fighters with heavy weapons are approaching from the north. They'll be in position to reinforce the ambush in approximately 20 minutes. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she processed this information. The Americans were already outnumbered and pinned down by the current enemy force. The arrival of 200 additional fighters with heavy weapons would turn a difficult situation into a complete massacre. The breakout attempt would have to succeed within the next 20 minutes, or it would be too late. Rodriguez, does Ground Command know about the reinforcements? Affirmative, Hawkeye 6. Colonel Mason is aware and he's moving up the timeline for the breakout. They're going to start moving in 5 minutes instead of 15. Sarah realized that the compressed timeline would make her fire support mission even more challenging. Instead of having time to systematically engage each enemy position, she would need to provide rapid, continuous suppression of multiple targets while American forces moved through the kill zone. The margin for error had just shrunk to almost nothing. She began her next attack run against the RPG positions on the western ridge, knowing that this phase of the battle would determine whether 270 American soldiers lived or died. As she dove toward the enemy positions, Sarah could see muzzle flashes erupting from concealed positions all around the valley. The insurgents knew that their window of opportunity was closing, and they were throwing everything they had at the trapped Americans. Her 30mm cannon roared to life again, sending streams of depleted uranium rounds into the rocky positions where the RPG teams had taken cover. Explosions rippled along the ridgeline as her fire found its mark, but she could see that some of the enemy fighters were already moving to backup positions. Hawkeye 6, this is Groundhog Actual. We're beginning our movement now. Can you provide continuous fire along the northern ridge to keep their heads down? Roger. Groundhog Actual. Beginning suppression run on the northern positions. Sarah swung her aircraft around toward the northern ridge, where the largest concentration of enemy fighters had established their positions. This would be the most dangerous part of her mission, requiring her to fly repeated passes over heavily defended terrain while providing precise fire support for moving friendly forces. As she lined up for her first suppression run, Sarah could see American vehicles beginning to move in the valley below. The breakout attempt had begun, and the next few minutes would determine whether her efforts to save 270 soldiers would succeed or fail. The enemy reinforcements were still approaching from the north, and time was running out for everyone trapped in the kill zone. Sarah armed her weapon systems and prepared to make the most important gun runs of her military career. The northern ridge erupted in explosions as Sarah's 30mm cannon rounds tore through enemy positions. Below her, she could see American vehicles racing across the valley floor, their occupants trusting her to keep enemy fire suppressed long enough for them to reach safety. Dust clouds marked the path of their desperate escape as drivers pushed their vehicles to maximum speed across the rough terrain. Hawkeye 6, this is Groundhog Actual. First wave of vehicles is moving toward the southern exit. We're taking some fire from positions on the eastern slope. Can you shift fire to support our movement? Sarah immediately adjusted her attack run to target the eastern positions, knowing that every second of delay could cost lives. As she brought her aircraft around, she could see that the enemy fighters had adapted to her tactics, spreading out their positions and using covered approaches to limit her effectiveness. They were learning from each of her attacks, making her job progressively more difficult. Her cannon fire raked across the eastern slope, sending enemy fighters scrambling for deeper cover. But even as she suppressed one position, others would open fire from different locations. The insurgents were using a coordinated defense, with each position providing covering fire for the others in a deadly game of tactical leapfrog. Good suppression, Hawkeye 6. First convoy is through the kill zone and moving toward friendly lines. We're sending the second wave now, but they're carrying most of our wounded. They'll be moving slower and they'll need more time under fire. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the implications. The second convoy would be more vulnerable due to their reduced speed, and they would be carrying the soldiers who were least able to protect themselves. She would need to provide even more intensive fire support, but her ammunition supplies were running dangerously low. A quick check of her weapons display showed that she had fewer than 400 rounds of 30mm ammunition remaining, along with 2 rockets. If the battle continued much longer, she would be forced to leave the area to rearm, abandoning the soldiers on the ground at their most critical moment. Groundhog Actual, be advised I'm getting low on ammunition. I can provide support for this convoy, but I may need to depart for rearmament if the situation continues much longer. Hawkeye 6, we can't afford to lose you now. The third wave includes our most seriously wounded, and they won't survive without air support. How long can you stay on station? Sarah made rapid calculations in her head, weighing ammunition expenditure against the time required to complete the evacuation. If she could conserve her remaining rounds and use them with maximum efficiency, she might be able to support all 3 convoys, but it would require perfect shooting and a significant amount of luck. Groundhog Actual, I can support one more convoy after this one, but it'll be close. I need your people to move fast and minimize their exposure time." As the second convoy began its movement across the valley floor, Sarah could see that the enemy fighters were concentrating their fire on the slower-moving vehicles carrying wounded soldiers. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked toward the convoy from multiple positions, forcing the drivers to take evasive action that slowed their progress even further. Sarah dove her aircraft toward the RPG positions, using her remaining rockets to break up the most threatening concentrations of enemy fire. The white phosphorus warheads detonated among the rocky outcroppings, creating screening smoke that obscured enemy vision while marking their positions for follow-up cannon fire. Her targeting system locked onto one of the RPG teams just as they prepared to fire another round at the convoy. Sarah's finger found the trigger and sent a precise burst of 30mm rounds into the position, silencing the threat just seconds before it could launch. The near miss made her realize how close the enemy had come to destroying one of the medical evacuation vehicles. "Second convoy is clear of the kill zone, Hawkeye 6. Outstanding work. We're preparing the third and final group now. These are our most critical casualties, so we need maximum suppression during their movement." Sarah's ammunition display now showed fewer than 200 rounds remaining. She would need to make every shot count during the final evacuation phase, using her cannon fire only against the most immediate threats to the convoy. The mathematical precision required would test every aspect of her training and experience. As she positioned for another attack run, Sarah's radar warning system began emitting urgent tones. Her electronic warfare suite had detected the activation of surface-to-air missile systems somewhere in the valley. The enemy reinforcements had arrived, and they had brought anti-aircraft weapons with them. "Hawkeye 6, this is Rodriguez. We're detecting SAM sites activating in your area. The reinforcements have brought portable air defense systems. You need to be extremely careful with your attack profiles." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that the tactical situation had just shifted dramatically. Surface-to-air missiles would force her to operate at higher altitudes and use more cautious approach angles, reducing the accuracy of her fire support just when precision was most critical. The enemy reinforcements had timed their arrival perfectly to maximize their impact on the evacuation. "Rodriguez, I copy the SAM threat. I'm going to continue supporting the final convoy, but my effectiveness may be reduced due to the need to avoid missile engagement zones." "Hawkeye 6, Colonel Mason says to abort the mission if the threat becomes too high. We don't want to lose an aircraft and pilot over this." Sarah looked down at the valley floor, where she could see the final convoy preparing for their dash to safety. These vehicles carried soldiers who had been wounded in the initial ambush, men and women who had already paid a price for serving their country. Some of them might not survive the medical evacuation flight even if they reached safety quickly. The thought of Emma waiting for her at home flashed through Sarah's mind. Her daughter needed a mother who would come home safely from deployments. But the soldiers below needed someone who wouldn't abandon them when survival hung in the balance. "Rodriguez, I'm staying on station to support the final convoy. The threat is manageable if I adjust my tactics." "Roger, Hawkeye 6. Be careful down there." Sarah began her final series of attack runs using high-altitude approaches designed to minimize her exposure to surface-to-air missiles. The increased altitude reduced the accuracy of her cannon fire, but she compensated by using longer bursts and accepting a higher rate of ammunition consumption. Every round now carried the weight of lives in the balance. The third convoy began its movement just as enemy reinforcements reached the valley. Sarah could see fresh muzzle flashes erupting from new positions as hundreds of additional fighters joined the battle. The volume of fire directed at the escaping vehicles increased dramatically, forcing the convoy to take a more circuitous route toward safety. "Hawkeye 6. We're taking heavy fire from the new positions on the northern slope. The convoy is pinned down about halfway through the kill zone. We need immediate suppression of those positions or we're going to lose vehicles." Sarah dove toward the northern slope, knowing that this attack run would bring her well within range of the surface-to-air missiles. Her radar warning system screamed constant alerts as missile guidance radars locked onto her aircraft. She had seconds to complete her attack before the missiles launched. Her cannon fire swept across the northern positions, breaking up the concentrated fire that had stopped the convoy. Explosions walked along the ridgeline as her depleted uranium rounds found their marks. The enemy fire slackened enough for the convoy to resume movement, but Sarah knew she had used most of her remaining ammunition in the process. "Missiles in the air, Hawkeye 6! 2 SAMs launched from your 6 o'clock position!" Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares while diving toward the valley floor. The A-10's twin engines provided enough thrust to accelerate away from the missile engagement zone, but the radar warning system continued to indicate active tracking by additional missile systems. Behind her, she could see the vapor trails of the surface-to-air missiles as they struggled to match her evasive flight path. The countermeasures she had deployed successfully spoofed the missile guidance systems, causing both projectiles to detonate harmlessly in the space where her aircraft had been seconds earlier. "Missiles defeated, Hawkeye 6. Continue your mission." Sarah pulled out of her evasive dive and immediately turned back toward the convoy, which was still taking heavy fire from multiple enemy positions. Her ammunition display now showed fewer than 50 rounds remaining, barely enough for one more gun run. She would need to make this final attack count for everything. "Groundhog Actual, this is Hawkeye 6. I'm down to my last few rounds. What's the status of the final convoy?" "Hawkeye 6, we're about 2 minutes from the safety of friendly lines, but we're taking casualties from sniper fire. If you can suppress the snipers on the eastern ridge, we should be able to complete the evacuation." Sarah could see the sniper positions through her targeting system. Approximately 6 enemy fighters spread along a quarter-mile section of ridge line. With only 50 rounds remaining, she would need to eliminate all 6 positions with unprecedented accuracy, using an average of 8 rounds per target. She lined up for her final attack run, knowing that this would determine whether her mission ended in success or failure. Below her, the last group of wounded American soldiers was depending on her to clear the path to safety. The convoy vehicles were clearly visible now, racing along the valley floor with enemy bullets sparking off their armored hulls. Sarah's finger found the trigger one last time as her targeting reticle settled over the first sniper position. The familiar thunder of her 30mm cannon filled the cockpit as she walked her fire along the eastern ridge, using controlled bursts to eliminate each target in sequence. Dust and debris marked each successful hit as the sniper positions fell silent one by one. "Outstanding shooting, Hawkeye 6. All sniper positions are neutralized. The convoy is clear and moving to friendly lines." Sarah pulled up from her final attack run with her ammunition completely expended. Her aircraft had taken multiple hits during the prolonged engagement, but all critical systems remained functional. Below her, she could see the last convoy vehicles disappearing over the ridgeline that marked the boundary of friendly territory. "Groundhog Actual, this is Hawkeye 6. All ammunition expended returning to base. What's the final casualty count?" "Hawkeye 6. This is Colonel Mason. Thanks to your fire support, we successfully evacuated all 270 personnel from the ambush site. We have wounded, but no fatalities during the evacuation phase. You saved a lot of lives today." As Sarah turned her aircraft toward home, she could see enemy fighters emerging from their concealed positions to examine the damage her attacks had inflicted. The ambush site was littered with destroyed equipment and abandoned positions, evidence of a tactical victory that had been won at considerable cost to both sides. The flight back to base gave Sarah time to process what had happened during the morning mission. She had repeatedly violated standard safety protocols for close air support, accepting risks that should have resulted in friendly fire casualties or the loss of her aircraft. By every measure of conventional military doctrine, her actions had been reckless and inappropriate. But 270 American soldiers were returning to their families because she had been willing to take those risks. Every decision she had made during the battle had been weighed against the alternative of watching her fellow service members die in an ambush kill zone. When faced with that choice, the rule book had seemed far less important than the lives depending on her. As her aircraft touched down on the runway at Bagram Air Base, Sarah could see ground crews waiting to assess the battle damage her A-10 had sustained. Multiple bullet holes were visible in the wings and fuselage, testament to the intensity of the ground fire she had faced during her low-level attack runs. Her crew chief approached the aircraft as she shut down the engines, shaking his head at the extent of the damage. "Captain Mitchell, this bird took a real beating today. What kind of mission were you flying out there?" Sarah removed her helmet and looked back toward the mountains where 270 soldiers were now safe, because she had refused to abort her mission when the tactical situation became too dangerous. The official after-action report would probably criticize her for violating safety protocols and taking unnecessary risks with valuable equipment. But tonight, 270 families would not receive visits from casualty notification officers. 270 soldiers would wake up tomorrow morning because an A-10 pilot had decided that some risks were worth taking when lives hung in the balance. Sarah thought about Emma waiting for her back home in Ohio and realized that her daughter would be proud of what her mother had accomplished today, even if she was too young to understand the full significance of the mission. Some decisions transcended regulations and doctrine, requiring the kind of moral courage that defined the difference between following orders and truly serving one's country. As she walked away from her battle-damaged aircraft, Sarah knew that she would face an investigation into her conduct during the mission. Military bureaucracy would demand explanations for every violation of standard procedure, every risk she had accepted in pursuit of mission success. But she also knew that 270 soldiers would testify on her behalf, and that testimony would carry more weight than any regulation manual. She had kept faith with the warrior ethos that demanded she never leave a fallen comrade behind, and she had proven that sometimes the most important victories required the courage to ignore the rules in service of a higher calling.